All right. Welcome, everybody, to our IBIA Social Cognition, Communication and Affect Special Interest Group webinar. This will be our last webinar for the year, and I'm absolutely delighted that we're welcoming one of my dear friends and colleagues from the United Kingdom, Dr. Nicholas Behn, to speak with us this morning. Nick is an amazing TBI researcher who originated from Australia, I must say, but has now settled in the UK, and he's conducting an amazing program of research, working with a whole gamut of issues related to cognitive communication disorders in people with brain injury, and he's also been working in the field of stroke rehabilitation as well. Nick is an accomplished researcher and was recently awarded an NIHR fellowship, which he'll be conducting both in the UK but also with us in Australia, which I'm very pleased about. And he's a senior research fellow at City University in London. So I'd like to welcome Nick, and he's going to present to us for about 45 minutes about his work relating to project-based treatments. And we do have time for questions at the end. So if you think of a question along the way, you can record it in the chat, and we'll address those when Nick's finished. So I'll now hand over to Nick. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Okay, and thank you very much for inviting me to do this. It's really lovely. So today, tonight, this morning, this afternoon, I'm going to talk about projects and how we can use them to support meaningful rehabilitation for people with acquired brain injury. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the background evidence, talk a bit about the core components for delivering a project, talk a little about setting individualized goals, and then discuss some of the current research findings. And this is a whistle-stop tour of project-based intervention. I'm not going to tackle it all within 45 minutes. So I'm hoping it just gives you a bit of a taster of this. So I'm going to start with a definition. So myself and colleagues from the US, we updated our definition of what we felt project-based intervention was. So we defined it as an intervention that delivers a self-identified, meaningful, concrete product. So by self-identified, it's the people with brain injury that we're working with. They identify the project that they're going to work on, not us, the therapist. And it's got to be meaningful to them, and it's got to result in a concrete product. So it's got to be something tangible that they can put their hands on at the end of the intervention. And it's where that individual is considered an expert contributor. So I regularly call my clients, they're experts in their experiences of having had a brain injury. And we give them roles as part of their projects where they're considered experts. And the product has to be something that benefits somebody, so somebody other than themselves. So that's basically the definition I'm kind of going to be using as we go through these slides. Now, some of you, I guess, I realize are probably not familiar with project-based intervention. So I thought what I'd do is actually start with some examples of some projects. So these are projects that have been done around the world, and you can access these very easily over the internet. The Summer Foundation in Australia, they create training videos by people with brain injury for their support workers. At the College of St. Rose, the Moving Message is a fundraising project that they do. Jerry Hepner in the US creates poetry books written and created by people with brain injury, and it's published and they can be purchased. And Melissa Capo also at College of St. Rose does pep talks, which can be accessed on YouTube. And it's where people with brain injury will talk about their experiences of doing things where they want to get that information out. For example, it could be something like fishing one-handed, or knowing what to do on a first date, those type of things. These are other ones I've seen around the world. So in the UK, Headway, which is our private charitable organization for supporting people with brain injury, the people with brain injury created a brain injury cookbook, which can be purchased. It gets funds going back into the charity. Unmasking brain injury, I think this is a lovely project. I first became aware of it in Toronto at an IBIA conference, and it's quite a powerful project, I think, in which clients start raise awareness of how the brain injury has affected them. And then closer to home in London, or just north of London, the Packing Shed Theatre, they do theatre shows by people with brain injury talking about their experiences. So you can also see, just as I'm talking about these projects, none of these are really communication specific as such. So projects don't necessarily need to be communication specific, but I'm certainly going to come at it from that angle. These are the projects kind of I've worked on with patients in the UK, which were communication focused projects. And these can all be accessed on YouTube. So you can go onto the YouTube channel, and what you have is art projects, videos, pamphlets, podcasts. So yeah. So basically, I just wanted to give you a bit of a whistle stop of just what a project is. So you've got this in your mind as we're going through the slides. This is a quote I quote all the time. It's kind of my mantra, I guess. Mark Ilvasaka says, in the absence of meaningful engagement in chosen life activities, interventions ultimately fail. And essentially saying, if we don't do rehab or create treatments that are meaningful to the people that we're working with, if they're not invested, engaged in those treatments, then the things that we do are probably not going to be that successful. And at the same time, this is where Mark first talked about the idea of projects. And what projects were back then was a list of these kind of 10 principles, guiding principles, I guess, that I had to make sense of. But this was, I guess, the first starting point for kind of thinking about projects in a brain injury context. Excuse me. The good things with projects is you get to learn and practice a range of skills. So it's not just about communication, although you can see there, you get the opportunity to interact with others if you're doing a group project, and they get to express their thoughts and opinions and have verbal arguments within a group. They gain feedback from talking to one another. But then from a cognitive perspective, they get the skills in being able to, well, how do we plan and organize the tasks that we're going to do to achieve the project? What supports need to be in, what scaffolds, what memory strategies do we need to put in? How do we self-monitor our own communication skills? How do we self-monitor what we're doing within the task and within the project? And how do we reflect and regulate the skills within those sessions? And then you also have the ability to address kind of if there's oppositional attitudes, within the project group. And actually those people that have anxiety issues or self-esteem, as we sometimes saw in some of our groups, they were also, you get to see those as well. So there's a lot you can learn and practice within the context of the group. Excuse me. There's a lot of existing research around project-based intervention. So Mark talking about it in 2007, it wasn't new in terms of other fields. So it's largely drawn from the education field. So this is where project-based learning is quite popular, particularly around adolescence. So really helping adolescents to kind of find solutions to real-world problems by clinically applying, using projects to kind of clinically apply those principles. So it's about, for them, it's about integrating the knowing and the learning. In aging, so in older people, there's been a number of studies over the years around things like doing choir groups or getting older people in care homes to refurbish the common spaces for the benefit of all the clients in the home. So these are the kind of projects they were doing. And as you can see there, there's a lot of things that come out of that in terms of physical health and life satisfaction. Excuse me. It gives them a sense of purpose, meaning. And actually in Gleb's et al. Study, they talked about using water clubs as a way of reducing GP calls and increasing social support. So there's lots of benefits that are coming from other populations. And I guess what I'm saying here is actually projects shouldn't be restricted just to brain injury, even though that's what I'm talking about. I think it has relevance to so many other clinical populations. And then, of course, in acquired brain injury, projects have been able to engage people in meaningful activities, improve communication, mood, and quality of life. So there's lots of benefits here. But I guess today what I wanted to focus on was a bit about cognitive communication disorder and how you can integrate communication skills within the context of a project. Excuse me. So you've got this is a definition. I'm going to assume many people understand what cognitive communication impairment is, but we're talking about those communication problems that result from the cognitive impairments people have with brain injury. So you might see people that lack initiation and drive and are talking in kind of short sentences or single words, or they may be verbose and tangential and struggle to stay on topic. And recently, and if you've ever seen Leanne talk about this, the latest INCOG recommendations that were released at the beginning of this year, they help guide us into the kind of things we need to be thinking about when we're doing rehabilitation for people with cognitive communication impairments. And I guess from a project, thinking about this in terms of projects, well, projects have the potential kind of to address all of these key types of rehabilitation, because they can be done individual or in groups. Some of the really good projects are ones that involve the communication partners as part of that process. And in terms of social cognition, you're constantly giving participants feedback on kind of emotional state and helping them to regulate their own behavior, but equally able to give them feedback about how what they're saying may impact another person in the group. So you're thinking about perspective taking and theory of mind. So you have the potential to actually attack a lot of these kind of things within the context of a project. And myself, Jerry Hetner, Mark, and many others, as you're going to see as we go through, we've talked quite regularly over the years around how projects can be used to target communication skills. It provides a context in which people can share their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences. It gives them an opportunity to meet other people and connect, and in doing that they get a real sense of belonging, and they get support not just from the therapist but also from their peers, and from that you can develop friendships and relationships. Jerry Hepner regularly talks about how he uses groups to really help reconstruct a person's identity. He does a lot of advocacy-based projects, and it gives these clients this kind of sense of self and accomplishment and empowerment from being involved in a project. And I think for many of them, it just gives people value. It makes them feel like a valued member of society. It gives them purpose to their life. It gives them meaning. And I guess meaning is where I kind of wanted to touch on just for a moment, because it was really interesting when I started thinking about projects, and someone said to me, so what is meaning? Define meaning. And it was strange, because in all my work, clinical work, you always talk about meaningful engagement, meaningful goals, meaningful participation, meaningful activities. And I'd never once thought to myself, but what is meaning? What is it? Like, how do I define it? And what I learned is that even amongst the philosophers, meaning philosophers, so nothing to do with brain injury, they can't even agree on a definition of meaning. And they go as far to say it is such a complex, fluid, multifaceted concept. One philosopher wrote to me an email, said, oh, it just doesn't surrender itself to a definition. And I was like, well, that's really unhelpful for me at the time when I was doing this research. But what they do say is they do agree on, I guess, some principles or some tenets. Excuse me. The first thing they say is that meaning involves connectedness. It's about someone having experiences and connecting those experiences or linking those experiences together. So that's one thing they'll say about meaning. The second thing they'll talk about is coherence. So the person needs to make an evaluation of their life or their experiences that they're having. And it needs, those kind of evaluations, those experiences, it all needs to make sense to the person experiencing them. And it needs to make sense within a bigger context. So it could be a goal, it could be their motivation for doing something, it could be just life at large, but everything needs to make sense. And if you think about this, a life that's disconnected and fragmented is a meaningless life, you could argue. And then this last one is that it's subjective. You know, a person's life has no meaning unless it's meaningful to someone. And the only person that can make a judgment on that is the person themselves experiencing those experiences. And we know that if someone's able to have a meaningful life and derive meaning from the things they do, they're going to have a higher quality of life. Their well-being is going to be improved. So this really got me thinking about meaning. And then how do you do it? How do you create meaning? Which is almost another problem, I guess. So I was drawn to a model of social participation. And this was created by an occupational therapist for working with older adults in care settings, but I think it has much relevance here. So if we think about these, so essentially it's a model to help us understand the goals of the activity and the person's involvement. And I guess what I'm trying to think of here is there's multiple contexts or ways in which a person may find meaning in what it is they're actually doing. So if you look at level 1 and 2, you're talking about them doing activities pretty much at an individual level, completely by themselves. So it could be something like they're getting dressed in the morning in preparation for going out for coffee with friends. Or they may be with others. So that being with others, that level 2, maybe, for example, they're walking down the neighborhood by themselves and there's people around them, but they're not really interacting. And then your level 3 and 4, you're starting to interact with others. So this, from a clinical perspective, you're starting to think about group-based therapy, whereas more individual stuff is happening at levels 1 and 2. And then this level 5 and 6, and this, I guess, was my light bulb moment. This is a kind of about social engagement beyond the person, beyond the immediate context. And what I certainly found, and I'm going to come back to this, is that this kind of helping others, this contribution to society is actually quite a powerful motivator for people with brain injury. And if you look through all the kind of qualitative studies, people with brain injury are constantly saying they want to give back, they want to be someone, they want to do something that feels valued, they want to feel a sense of empowerment, and actually doing projects that really start to, and this is why we say it's got to benefit somebody. So we've got to hit that kind of social engagement for it to kind of develop the links and the coherence for the person with brain injury to give it meaning. And this is kind of the background of, I guess, my thinking here. So this kind of led me to kind of go, okay, I had these 10 guiding principles from Mark. I have no idea how I'm going to run a project. I'm going to try and do it and do a nice study that helps us to understand this a little bit more. So we designed a a quasi-randomized control trial. So I say quasi because it probably wasn't as good a randomized control trial, but it had the intention was there. But essentially, we had 21 people, and you can actually see when you just look through these participants, we're talking about people in their 40s. We're talking about chronic people with chronic communication impairments, and we're not talking about they've just had their injury. We're talking about people on average around 11, 12 years, mix of trauma, non-traumatic injuries, significant cognitive impairment and executive impairment. So hopefully, I guess some of the kind of people we might be seeing on our caseloads. And we put them through, we did a treatment, a 10 2-hour sessions over 6 weeks, where the first session was me, the person with brain injury, and their communication partner, starting to come up with some individualized communication-based goals, identifying some strategies to help their interactions. Then I brought the group together, and we actually started thinking about everyone else's goals. We started talking about what project we wanted to work on. I literally went into this group. These clients had never met each other before. I'd never met them beyond the first individual session. They had no idea what a project was, what they were going to work on. And we spent the next few sessions trying to give them scaffolds, give them structures and memory strategies to try and help them navigate the cognitive impairments, and then come up with a project idea that they kind of worked on throughout the course of the group. So we kind of did that. And what we found, so this is what we call a feasibility study. So I wasn't trying to, this was not effectiveness study. It was just to work out, can it be done? Nothing like this had been done in this way. So a lot of Mark's earlier work was doing some service evaluation work with some of the clients that was within his service that really set the scene for kind of what we're doing here. What we found is actually, obviously some recruitment issues, but what I'm learning is in brain injury, it is difficult to recruit. But I think what's most important here is we had no dropouts, not a single dropout. So 21 people with chronic acquired brain injury able to attend all 10 sessions, or sorry, you're going to see 90% attendance at least. So we had no dropouts. Communication partners largely stayed in. The only reason I've got a question mark there is because the recruitment rate being low, it was difficult to recruit. We were able to do all 8 treatment groups that we actually set out to do, and we had 90% attendance. The group format, 2 hours, a break in the middle, that all seemed adequate. There was no issues there. From looking at a practicality perspective, all groups could identify a suitable project. They were all completed within the 10 sessions. Text messages were sent on goals and action plans. So that's what we used as a strategy for memory reminders. That went well. Homework tasks, that's probably where we had the most problem, like getting people to do their homework. We didn't tend to call it homework. In our trial, we called it action plans. So we started using more business-like terminology. So that's where that was. In terms of initial efficacy results, remember, this is not powered as a big trial. This is literally just to get information about feasibility. We saw some communication changes post-treatment. We saw some communication changes that were sustained at follow-up for the communication partner. And we saw, there were some changes to quality of life, but you can see the p-values is why I've got the question mark there, because it's right on the cusp. I'm not going to sit here and say all the communication outcomes we did were brilliant and they all delivered positive results. They didn't. But what you start to see is there are some evidence of effect there. And when you look at the effect sizes, we're not, particularly for the first 2, we're seeing potentially some large effect sizes that would seem to suggest if we powered this study up, we might get the significant results we were looking for. What's most interesting for me was goals. So we set communication goals with something called goal attainment scaling, and I'll show it to you in a moment. And what we found is that people with brain injury achieved their goals from pre to post treatment and sustained them at follow-up. And we had our people with brain injury rate their goals separately to the communication partner. And the communication partner saw that same trend of improvement from pre to post, maybe not as high as the people with brain injury, but that's probably hardly surprising given we know that people with brain injury have impaired awareness. And they saw that sustain the maintenance of their goal from post to follow-up. To give you, these are some of the goals that we set with our people with brain injury. So getting them to talk a little less with people, making sure the topic that they were using was interesting. And then we scaled it on this kind of 5-point scale, ranging from 0 up to 4. So level 1 is what we call the baseline levels. That's where the patients are at the start the treatment. So if they deteriorate as a result of the treatment, they'll go down to level 0. And if they improve, you expect them to get to number 2, but anything better than that is 3 or 4. I'm not going to go through gas in a lot of detail, but what you start seeing is gas is being used by a number of researchers around the world as an outcome for rating specific communication-based goals for people with CCD. So Emma Finch in Australia has done it. I've done it. Louise Keegan has done it. We've used slightly different scales, as you can see. You know, I've gone from 0 to 4. Louise Keegan's gone from 1 to 5. It's all the same thing. Louise and I don't tend to like using negative ratings because sometimes people with brain injury react negatively to that. So yeah. And what I put there is there's a chapter in this book that Louise Keegan led on where we talk a bit about gas in a bit more detail, and there's a checklist of things to be aware of when writing the goals. I've learned a lot since doing this trial about how to write gas goals. So I'm not going to profess that the way I've written goals in the past is perfect. I've learned a lot over the years. The other thing we found with this trial, it was just acceptable to our participants. They really liked it. They were chuffed. They found doing the project was rewardable. They really enjoyed it, working on their goals, and it really kind of resonated with them. And qualitatively, we saw lots of benefits in terms of there was a positive change in their communication, emotional effects. They really loved the opportunity to meet others and having just something to do. And they also perceived some cognitive changes. And this is just a quote from someone. It helped me firstly to see where I still had areas of improvement. Keep in mind, this is someone who's chronic ABI. I knew there were problems, but I couldn't pinpoint them, and no one's ever been able to bring them up before. And I think part of it would be able to see it for myself, and that was the big thing. What was striking is so many clients, so many years post-injury, their goal was for some of them about awareness and developing communicative awareness. And they were able to get that as a result of being involved in this treatment. Now, just to do a bit of a case study, this is a case study of Claire, who was one of the participants, and you can see her on one of the videos. So she had a burst aneurysm, lived at home with her husband, had a really supportive family, really impaired cognitively, had a lot of emotional effects as a result of the injury. So very anxious, depressed, very low self-esteem, didn't have good coping strategies in place. And she was going to a private charity for counseling, and she had very impaired communication. So it was really difficult for her to have conversations. The conversations felt very forced, stilted, responses very short, low confidence. And the big thing was she and her mum really didn't have a good relationship. There was a lot of agitation and frustration between them. Her goal was simply to try and give more extended responses in conversations. Now, if you want to see more of Claire, it's the Phoenix project that she was involved in. Now, after the treatment, she had full and appropriate participation in conversation. So she had 25% improvement on our measure of conversation. And the GAS goal that she did, which was the more extended responses, was achieved to a better than expected level by her standards. And sorry, that moment when you just realize your laptop needs to be switched in. Okay, now it is. Okay, sorry about that. And quality of life. So the subjective satisfaction with life scale improved from 9 to 32 out of 35, which is a huge jump for someone like her within a short period of time, remembering this is a 6-week intervention. And the Qualibri, which is the quality of life in brain injury, the overall total score jumped from 29% to 74%. So she made some huge improvements. She could recognize the changes in her communication skills. She could identify conversations with her mum and father were better. She felt better within herself. She could talk more. She actually became a little bit more chatty. And her mother was actually impressed with how much Claire could talk to her in a really positive, reinforcing way. So there was less of that agitation happening. And these are just some of the quotes that she had, but she felt really uplifted. The change in mood for her was quite noticeable. So this is the trial that we did, but there are so many other things happening. And I guess what I wanted to do was give you a bit of flavor about how our thoughts about project intervention have evolved, have changed over the years, and where we think about things now. So you saw these on one of the opening slides. So I was working, I did a piece of work with the College of St. Rose. This came out of the pandemic when we found ourselves running project groups completely online and via telehealth because we had no other way to do them. And what we found is, and a lot of what we did was more qualitative at this stage. It was more service evaluation. But people were saying, I like helping people. It's who I am. It feels weird that me, the one who knows nothing, is the expert on something. And this is a big thing that comes out of projects, is empowering them to feel like they've got something to bring to the group, that they have value, that they're not someone who's defined by their brain injury. They're actually defined by so much more than that. I love doing something to help someone else. So you start seeing this kind of helping others, this altruistic kind of feeling comes through in projects quite a lot. I feel strong after recording my speech and feeling. So what we'd done, so I'd run some telehealth. I'm not showing them all on these slides, but I had done some telehealth groups. So had one of my other colleagues, Jerry Hepner, and we looked at our model of social participation and we started mapping our groups. And what we found is that, okay, so I ran a lecture group, which is what this one refers to. A lot of it was clients actually doing a lecture to speech therapy students about their brain injury. So a lot of it was around about that engaging, social engagement, doing things for others, with others. And actually, Jerry Hepner did motivational interviewing, hitting those kind of higher levels of this model. Pep talks. Okay, you see how projects, whilst you can do things in those earlier levels, 1, 2, and 3, what they all consistently do is it's about those lower 3 levels, about social engagement, working together, collaborating together to kind of do something for other people. So this kind of got us thinking about projects, because it all sounds really complicated and it sounds like there's just lots of things happening all at once. And we kind of wanted to work out, well, how do we get this out to clinicians? How do we help clinicians think about projects? And so we put our kind of thinking caps on, and we were, I guess, fortunate that some researchers in the US had been working on the rehabilitation treatment specification system. And this is a system that helps us to understand how treatments work and why do they work. And they kind of say, well, if we can understand what the overall aim is of a treatment, and then we break that down into the target. So you can see this on the right. So the target is, what is the actual aspect of functioning you're trying to change? So it could be So for Claire, it was to have extended responses in conversation. It could be to have more turns. It could be to say more or talk less. That's your target. That's the thing you're trying to change from the treatment. If I go to the extreme left, and actually the aim of that would be to have better conversations or have better interactions. So I'm not necessarily, if I think about Claire, my aim, my hope was actually by having extended responses, she would have better conversations with her mother. I was not directly targeting that, but that was what I was hoping would happen. So it's not always the case the aim gets not addressed, but the aim gets fixed. I know that's not the right word, but you know where it's, sorry, it's 8:30 at night here, so my mind's slightly haywire. So, and then on the left, you've got ingredients. What is it you do as the therapist to try and bring about that change in that target? And the mechanism of action is the process in which that change occurs. So we started trying to break this all down. And I mean, this was a pandemic piece of work that we did. So bear with us. So the 5 of us got together. We met quite frequently over a 9-month period. And we did 3 things. We did literature review to see, okay, what's out there with respect to projects in the field of acquired brain injury. It was not a systematic or scoping review. It's a really just broad, quick and dirty review, I'll say. Then we mapped all the information from the studies we found from the review onto the RTSS. And then what we tried to do is make sense of that information using that framework. So we ended up with, I need to have a look now. We had, I haven't got it. It's 14 studies. We started with around about 450 papers, whittled those down to, I think, about 17 papers that describe 14 studies. So you can see they came from 4 different countries. They went from involving 1 right up to 39 people. Some were group projects, some were individual projects, some were a bit of both. The length of time, projects ran from 4 weeks right up to 18 months were reported, or 3 to 36 hours. It's what makes doing a project so difficult, because researchers, myself included, I tried to jam-pack projects into a 6-week program, 20 hours. But the thing I've learned more as years have progressed is a project that lasts 10 hours is still a project. You may just do those 10 hours over 10 months and just do a 1-hour session a month. If you look at some of those telehealth projects that I put up, the dosage is completely different in each of them. And it's not that we wouldn't call them a project, but we just do them differently. This is why it's hard to get funding for this kind of research, because in research, they like to say the treatment is a defined package, and it's really hard to package this intervention. We saw a range of different studies, as you can see on the top right, and lots of different projects: drama classes, press letters, gardening, book clubs, and so forth. So we took all the information, we extracted everything from all of these studies to try and make sense. And this is kind of what we came up with, and this is me going to do it at total speed, which is, we felt that all those studies described 4 broad aims. You either had projects that are around about skills training and self-efficacy, so thinking about confidence, so improving confidence around specific skills the person with brain injury wanted to develop. You may have had some around advocacy and self-empowerment, emotional well-being and quality of life, and then collaboration and community belonging. And for that final category, the collaboration and community belonging, that comes from a group project. Whereas the first 3, you could do that as an individual project. And any project could do multiple aims. So you could have a project that does several of these things at once. So that's where we got with the aims. Then we move on to targets. This is where it starts to get a bit complicated. But you can see at the top, I've got those 4 main aims. And then the targets down each column correspond to each of those aims. And you can see the group treatment is a plus or minus, because you don't necessarily have to do group treatment. And we've come up with what we call target themes. So it was really hard to identify the exact target that we're trying to change. So this is just a starting point for us. So say, for example, if I look at that second column, if I want to do a project around advocacy and self-empowerment, the targets for that might be improve social communication, or it might be increased competence in sharing a personal narrative. So you will kind of create a target around those kind of items. Okay, so this can sometimes help you with thinking about outcomes that you might use for a project. You look at this and realize also a project can do so many things. And if, as a therapist, we can't do all of this as much as we want to, we can't. So actually, it's about being selective and talking to our clients and working out what it is they want from rehab. So what is most meaningful to them, and then working out what target and which aim is probably most appropriate for the project that you're actually doing. And then we start thinking about the ingredients. So what is it you as the therapist does, and what objects do you actually use to achieve those targets? So we again started to think, okay, if I was doing, say, skills training and self-efficacy, I need to promote completion of the product. I need to support organization and problem-solving skills. I need to promote self-monitoring and self-regulation and so forth. These are the things I need to be doing as a clinician to help them achieve this aim and achieve a target within that column. The other thing I'll say here is this is a bit like these two graphs are very much a bit like a pick and mix. So you don't have to work your way down a column. You might say, actually, I want to do an advocacy and self-empowerment project, but actually I'm going to work on a target within the skills training, and I might use some of the ingredients from the emotional well-being and quality of life. And that's absolutely fine. You know, it's about just getting us thinking about how we think about projects. Hopefully this is making sense a little bit. So I know this is a lot to take in, so I'm gonna just stop there and just give you a bit of a summary as to kind of where we are with projects. So for me, projects provide a meaningful context in which we can target, which we can look at communication skills. And I hopefully, certainly from the early ideas of projects I had in the first few slides, you start to see that there's potential for extending it beyond brain injury. So if you're working in other fields, projects may have relevance here. And if you're not an SLT, it doesn't necessarily have to be a communication specific project. You could think about other occupational therapy or physiotherapy kind of targets as well. There's multiple aims, multiple targets, multiple ingredients. Use those graphs flexibly, use them as a menu for what you think you want to do and what works best. But what I would say, and when I've talked to other people about projects, we've argued over we've had a nice discussion over, should the projects be group? Should they not? Some people don't do group projects for various reasons. They'll do individual projects. I think that's absolutely fine. But I think there is something else that comes from doing group work. The peer feedback, the meeting the others, the social connection, dealing with conflict comes up in groups like left, right, and center. And I love when that happens because it provides opportunities for discussion and thinking about social cognition. And then making sure what you do is driven by goals and that kind of concept of helping others. And certainly what I hope I've shown is that, look, there's some positive feasibility results. There's definitely potential there for telehealth delivery. I think doing big scale research is very difficult for this intervention because of how individualized and flexible it is. But, that's where we're at. And last, so thank you very much. These are my contact details. I do run a 6-week course in project-based intervention, which we do online. But I think there's lots of articles out there that can help guide you. And even the paper we wrote in 2022 lists all the 14 studies that we looked at, and some of those may have relevance for what you do. And I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Nick. What an amazing talk. I was madly writing notes, and so much, so much information there, and guidance, I think, for all of us in thinking about how do we proceed with project-based treatment, because you're right, it seems just so, it's like this huge black box. And what I like, what you've done there is you've started to unpack some of the features, and RTSS obviously was a really great way for you to do that. While I'm waiting for any questions, my question was for someone like, I think the case study was Claire, for people when they've kind of obviously had a great response, how do you then maintain that? Like, is it a matter of trying to get Claire involved with other activities, or like, because it clearly had a big impact on her. Those changes in her quality of life scores, for example, were quite remarkable. So yeah, where do you go? Have you sort of explored that sustainability option for some of these people that you've worked with?
Yeah, I think at that time I hadn't, but I have been working a little bit in like the last few years, working with kind of charities and actually helping them to adopt a more project-based approach to supporting people with brain injury, because obviously these are the organizations that support people for years and years and years post-injury.
Yeah.
So actually, because like I said, it doesn't have to be communication focused. So what I'm trying to do at the moment is work with charities to try and bring project-based intervention into their service delivery model, in a way that the kind of helping others is the fundraising. So it's about bringing money back into the charity to keep the charity going, because I don't know about in Australia, but certainly over here, a lot of the charities have been affected by COVID. They've been affected by the lack of government funding.
Yeah.
So they're having to reinvent the way they do things. And I think project-based intervention is a way to keep things going. So, that's the way I'm kind of thinking about it. I think also making sure you're not working with the person with brain injury in isolation, and working with the broader family and other people kind of attached to that person, so that they can keep things going even when you, the therapist, take a step back.
Yeah. We have a question from Molly, who is asking, she'd like to hear any thoughts or advice you have on group composition. Oh, Molly's there. Do you want to ask it yourself, Molly? Welcome.
Right. I thought I'd put on the camera so I'm not a weird lurker.
That's perfect. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for a wonderful presentation. My goodness, it's so many wonderful ideas. Yeah, I was just wondering if you've any advice around how to put a group together. What sort of considerations do you have just to make sure the right people are in the room or on that space together, and also at what point, and I missed the first few minutes, so apologies if you've mentioned it already, but at what point do you kind of navigate individual goals, and when do you decide what project the group's going to work on? If those questions make sense, Nicholas.
No, that's fine. As a clinician, as an early clinician, I was very sold on, you find clients with like impairments and you group those together. So you always struggled to get a group because you could never find the right mix of clients with the right type of impairments to put together. In the study that I ran, I didn't have that ability to think like that. I had to think like, where can I find 3 clients that live close together and could actually come to a single location at a single place for all the group treatment sessions? So I had the widest, biggest range of impairments in every group. And I was scared by that. But actually, having done it, I've realized now, and I say this to clinicians all the time, we should not be afraid to put your most severe brain injured patient with someone who's mild, or to have someone who's non-verbal with someone who's verbal. I would mix and match them completely. The things that happen, the dynamics that happen between participants in those groups is phenomenal. Like, you get some of your more mild ones almost acting as a volunteer. And so my role for them would be, you're my vice president for this group. I can't survive. Or you're the admin, you're head of admin, you know, like, or you're the, I'd call them the project manager, for example. I would never put myself in a leadership role in these projects. I'd always put one of my clients in that role. So that's the first point I'd say. Individual goals, it's an interesting one. For the trial that I did, and certainly what I do, is I do an individual session where we watch a videotape conversation, and we sit and have a discussion with the communication partner to work out what their goal is of concern. As part of the trial, we did all of that in a 2-hour session. So it was done at lightning speed. I think in reality, that might evolve. So you might have that first step in week 1, but that may evolve over the successive weeks in collaboration with the client and with their communication partner. And I found discussing it with the group members was always really helpful. They were always great for peer feedback. Just saying, you know, because they'd have to rate how they felt they went. And so when they thought they did poorly, the clients would always be there to say, actually, I think you did really well. And let me provide you an example of where I think you did really well. And that was much more powerful than me saying or giving any feedback to that client. So I'm whizzing through this quickly, and then the last about project ideas, this is, I think, the most threatening for us as therapists, because you go into your first group session knowing you're going to say, okay, guys, we're going to work on a project. What's the project? And they've got to come up with the idea. It's got to be self-identified. Some clients, and this is why a lot of these resources I publicize, because any of us around the world can access these resources to show our clients examples of what other people are doing around the world. I was told only the other week that my projects from my study are being used by other people with brain injury because they think videos are terrible, and their project is make a project that's better than what I produced. And hey, I'm all up for that if that's what it does. So it takes time. It takes time. And what I would say is, I think that's the most critical period where you need the therapist to be involved to facilitate the formulation of the project idea. Some clients, we did it in a week, 1 or 2 sessions. There was one group, the Better Future Project, that took about 5 sessions, 6 sessions to get to a common project idea, which basically meant the end product wasn't as polished, wasn't as it wasn't as good as some of the other ones, but that was the way it was. Yeah. I think once they've all bought into the project, attendance is just, they stick with it to the end because they want to see the end product. Sorry, hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's fascinating. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Molly, for that question. And we've got one other question, which probably will need to be our last, I think, from Penny Welch West, who has asked about what have you found helpful in helping patients come up with their own goals when they lack insight into their deficits? So that self-awareness issue.
Having a communication partner in those sessions was critical. And actually, where possible, have multiple communication partners in that session so they can hear things from multiple perspectives. That's a really important one to do. The video feedback, being able to watch it back. And sometimes for some people, their goal was simply just to develop awareness. And that was getting feedback from their communication partner between treatment sessions, you know, from me and their other peers during that process as well. So, you know, some clients that probably worked. That's what worked most. I think also it's about rapport. It's about how we give feedback to our clients, and being able to highlight those instances where they're doing well or where they could be doing things differently. So there's a lot of online feedback as well.
I mean, I saw that Claire obviously had an epiphany from there was obviously. I can't remember how chronic she was, Nick. I can't remember how long post-injury she was, but you know, can you reflect on what happened for her? Because something obviously clicked.
Yeah, she was several years post-injury, and I think she was just, there was the counseling and they were trying to deal with everything on an emotional level, but she was she was in a situation at home where she just wasn't getting out. She wasn't like, actually part of just going to the group, getting out of the house and coming to the group, that process in of itself is almost therapeutic in some respects, because everything she did was at home, which meant all the interactions were about her brain injury and what she couldn't do. So all of a sudden she could have conversations about what she could do. And what's really lovely about her project is she did not want to have her face shown on that project at all. She was adamant. And then as the other clients showed their faces, she changed her mind. And actually that was really powerful for her. And that was really empowering for her. So I think there's so many things at play here.
It speaks to identity, doesn't it?
Yeah. She had a greater sense of self. Like she just learned more about herself and had more sense of who she was after the treatment. There was something that happens with the discussions, like when you're running the project activities and you're talking about each other's lives and you're talking about what you've done and what you've accomplished and what you would like to do, and all those conversations happen as part of the group. So yeah.
And did you work with mum as well, because that she was having trouble talking with mum?
Strangely, very little. And this is actually really good so is it really good? No, but we talk about dosage of what we're doing with communication partners. So the mum was involved in the 2-hour individual session, and I had 2 phone calls with her during the course of the 6 weeks, and that was it.
Okay.
Very little that I actually had with mum. Yeah. But it was
that's important for us to know.
It's enough for mum to have to think about she needs to do things a little bit differently with her daughter. And that was all that needed to happen. I mean, I won't say that's the case with all communication partners, but yeah.
No. Well, I think it just points to the complexity, like that every case is different. And, I think you've really demonstrated that extremely well today. I just wanted to note Kevin from Kevin Behn has just posted a little note in the chat about a presentation that they gave, interactive social cognitive communication intervention. So thanks for that, Kevin, very much. And I think on that note, we might finish up our presentation. You've earned a well-earned glass of wine, I think, Nick. Thank you so much for doing this in your evening. It's our morning here in Australia, and I've got no idea what time it is in America. But it's been a truly international meeting.
Well, I think Alex should move to Philadelphia.
Oh, I thought Jennifer was telling us what time it was in America then. So thanks so much, Nick, for a really brilliant, thought-provoking presentation. It's I saw Jennifer put up that the recording will be up in a short while, and everybody who's registered for this will receive the recording. So if you've missed anything, we'd like to reflect further, you can go back and review the recordings, and they will also be up online in coming weeks. I encourage any of you who are not members of SOCCA to join. We have our own little tab on the IBIA website now, so if you want to go and connect with us, please do. It's 4 p.m. in Toronto. Thank you, Sonia. It's very exciting. There are many things I'm going to go away and actually put into a presentation I've got to do tomorrow. So, thank you so much, Nick. And thank you all. Thanks for attending, and we'll have further webinars next year. This was our last for this year, but we've had a very successful series so far. And we look forward to having more of these next year and connecting together in 2024, because our next big conference isn't until 2025. So we'll be doing a bit more of this next year just to get the gang together. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. So thanks very much for attending, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you later.